Oh, it's here he is. Here's Reece. Okay,
Hi.
so let's iron out some of the our technical challenges. Sorry about the late start. There's a lot going on. So we are going to be talking today about what's it called these days, Reece? The structuring.
Structuring Project East
Yeah,
Edition.
what a great name. The
It's
charismatic.
inspiring.
The name has a kind of equally exciting, proposal attached to it. Lots and lots of cool stuff that we love to see. Right, Reece?
Maybe.
Okay, so
Apparently it's loud, and apparently it's quite loud.
well, I mean, is it like crackly loud?
No, that's just what people in the chat are saying. I'm watching the chat. Apparently you're peaking.
Me. Okay. Well, I'll change. I can probably change my settings a little bit here. Okay, I should be less loud. I was actually worried about you being loud because your audio looks to be peaking on my end, but whatever. Okay.
We will find out what the people in the chat are saying.
Okay. So yeah, let's get into it.
Let's wait. Let's shoot the stuff until see what the public says about the audio quality.
Okay. Right.
Better.
Yeah.
It's better, apparently.
Well, you can go through some of the
okay, it's better.
Technical difficulties. We are coming to you soon. Take your time. Should we leave and come back at 6:45?
Okay, now it looks like it's good now.
Okay, great. So, seeing as this is in Montreal, I'm going to have a go at some French, Reece. You want me to try that? Okay. La première chose, le projet est vraiment cher et c'était un problème pour le projet. Le prix est absolument ridicule. C'est le prix pour tout le transport en commun en Québec pour 20 ans, je pense. Et ce projet est comme une éléphant blanche. En fait, c'est comme le stade olympique encore. C'est un projet qui va kill tout le futur pour le projet de transport en commun en Quebec. It's just too expensive, and it is a black hole that will suck in all of Quebec's transit for basically our lifetime, all in service of a very small group of people. So that's the kind of like summary, I guess, of what we're going to get into. There's lots of problems, and I think Reece wrote an article today and also went to a press conference. So I would like to hear, what's your first thing? What?
Paige, we are having a fun effect, which is that you have a zebra on your head.
Oh, I have a zebra stripe?
Yeah.
Oh, you know what it is? It's the it's been so long since I've done this. It is the HDMI. Okay. Yep. The HDMI output. Oh, Jesus Christ.
That means your quality is coming through well because I could not really see it through Hangouts.
I'm properly adjusted. But... Like I'm.
Yeah.
I have the right exposure. Anyway, okay. So yeah, Reece, let's take it away. This is going fucking great so far. What's the first thing to bring up about this project?
Well, I'm just gonna. I have the report open as well. Paige has the physical report, so I'm just kind of scrolling in from the top, and I'll just kind of see when I hit something that I can understand that is crazy. The first thing that I noticed is on page 15. It's basically introducing the whole situation as looking at the original Eastern REM project and saying we got to rethink a big portion of this.
This is page 16?
15.
15. Okay. The mandate. Oh, it's upside down as well. This is great. Need to flip this. Go on.
Yeah, so it's just it's talking about how these certain sections have lack consensus. Is that an accurate translation?
Yeah, this is the social acceptability consensus, because obviously all transport projects, typically everyone in the city agrees that it's the right
Yeah,
way to go
that's
forward, right?
natural.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, consensus is an interesting issue with the REM in general, right? Or with these transit projects. The goal of consensus is, I think, kind of ridiculous in the context of a massive infrastructure project. Like, it's impossible. There will never be anywhere near a large number of people who agree. Even if you're not a
Yeah.
NIMBY, there'll be plenty of people just living in the suburbs who are like, well, I'm never going to use that. Why would I want to pay for someone else's thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. It's the idea, and it is this idea that poisons the well for everything else in the report, because it basically says, we need to design a project that could not make anyone angry, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
Would you think that's yeah?
and I think you have this problem where you kind of it reminds me, the whole project in general kind of reminds me of what happens when I go to buy like a new computer. I go I go to the checkout and I kind of just gradually talk myself into checking so many boxes that increase the price. Oh, I'd like this. Oh, I'd like this. To in an effort to kind of appease every edge case, I'm like, oh, I might be needing to render. Oh, I might be needing some extra ports. You end up chucking the most expensive possible product in your cart, and it's kind of like the REM is the ARTM going shopping for a transit project using this kind of method, adding all points on like having features, but at the detriment of the project being at all feasible due to its cost.
Yeah, essentially. I don't think there's a more accurate way to put it.
Yeah. So the general thing with tunneling, right? Tunneling is on the range of things that you can do to build, like that you do when you're building a transit project. It is the most expensive in general thing, right?
Yeah. There's
So
no denying that because it's not just that it's expensive. When you're tunneling, you are effectively going in blind to some extent, right? It varies project to project, but you don't know what's underground. You know that there are utilities, but a lot of what's underground you can't tell. There's not diagrams and documents, so you're shooting in the dark, and that's why avoiding tunneling reduces risk so significantly. It's not just about the stuff you can expect, it's about the unexpected things, underground streams, underground explosives, all kinds of things that you could find underground that you may not anticipate, that delay and add risk and add cost.
it's interesting to note that actually in the the original REM, even though they weren't doing active tunneling, reusing even a tunnel caused a large delay because there were explosives in the tunnel for the
Yeah.
project. It's basically just, it's a place in our world that is hard to see underground. So you always end up with these things which may not add cost in terms of physical labor even, or needing to get a special machine in or whatever. A lot of the cost is just for delay, because when you've put in $36 billion, say, you end up and it's held up, this project, so there's no revenue coming in at all and it's not operating, that financing cost is what increases the cost. And I do think like a lot
And
of
there's
the that's a lot of what's wrong with this proposal. They're saying, what was it? You were at the press conference today, right? Is it 2035 or something like
13
that?
years, starting now, 13 years until it'll be finished.
It's like,
If
think
the
where you
process, he
were.
said, if the process moves properly, if it's, there's no delays, everything goes as planned, it will only take 13 years until completion. And that is assuming construction only takes, he said, 4 to 5 years, which is unlikely
Mm-hmm.
because there's a lot of tunneling required. So realistically, I would say it's like late 2030s.
Yeah, and that's even at, so at its most optimistic, It's an amount of time that if you're just selfishly like, well, I'd like to ride transit while I'm, you know, able to, it's potentially 2 decades
Yeah.
when you factor in we're not going to start immediately. We're going to be debating this because it's so expensive for the next. I mean, imagine in a magical world if the ARTM could go to the government, hey, we can build this for $1 billion, like peanuts. Political system moves fast, and if it's cheap, if it's crazy cheap like that, it's probably crazy like efficiently using existing infrastructure and not doing too bold a thing. Cost is just it's just a thing that correlates or it's connected to time. The two are just two sides of the same coin. And I think, that alone, just being like, the things that are cheap, you get to use soon. And if you like transit, you'll be excited about using it. Like looking at the REM website yesterday, I just got excited thinking, oh shit, this is going to be open in less than a month and I'm going to be able to ride it. And then I was looking at the opening dates for the next leg, and I'm like, even if it's delayed, even if it's the end of 2024 when it opens, man, that's going to be so cool. Like next year could be going to, out to the end of the West Island on the REM. And the fact that nothing remotely like that is going to happen, I'll be like well and truly middle-aged by the time this project goes ahead, is a real bummer, And all that time, people are driving. People are like, we're not achieving the climate goals and not getting to enjoy the densification benefits.
There's a great comment in the chat right now, which says that in the report they mentioned that there's going to be capacity issues on the Green Line by 2051.
Yeah.
So you have a 10-year roughly space where this project works pretty much as intended.
Yeah. So that's a huge kind of the most obvious can kick, I think, in this report. I don't know what page that's on, but
I don't either. They didn't say the page. It's in here.
So basically tunneling downtown. I mean, and this is an issue that we're just going to bounce around, I guess. When it comes to CDPQ, I think making a wrong call on a thing, the way that they were kind of like somewhat kind of paternal and protective about the tunneling downtown. Oh, it's impossible. It's just like, it is. No, it's possible. It just doesn't make sense. It's not, maybe what they meant to say is it's not financially possible, I would say the fact that this emits a tunnel downtown connection is proof that they were like, oh man, I mean, we're already talking about $36 billion. We can't add $20 billion to it to go downtown. That would be so obviously dead before it arrived, right? So it's like the Green Line connection is just them kicking the can, because as soon as the project opens, the Green Line's going to be overloaded and we're going to need to solve going downtown, And unless there's some magical tunneling machine invented in the next 15 years, it's just going to be the same debate. What's going on, Reece?
It's just funny. It's just, I don't think there's going to be a magical tunneling machine page. It seems unlikely.
It seems like actually things will be going the opposite direction, because it doesn't seem like we've gotten in 100 and whatever years of building subways. It doesn't seem like it's gotten cheaper to build
or
subways,
faster,
right?
Really.
It's going to be,
guess, yeah.
The port's going to be busier if we wanted to do cut and cover. The area is going to be more built up, because what we've been doing in that case is building transit that will probably create transit-oriented development in eastern Montreal. The population will be increasing, and there's this air-gapped bridge of the Green Line between the two systems. I mean, that's why we called this, the two reasons we've called this stream the REM to Nowhere is it's kind of like the California high-speed rail, building some fucking cool infrastructure detached from either in the high-speed rail case, San Francisco or Los Angeles. And it's also, this is a plan for nothing. This is like not a real thing that's going to actually happen. No one's going to take this seriously. It's going to be forced to become something cheaper. The government's already rejected
it. It goes into development hell. Like that's what happened with California high-speed rail, right? They actually started building it, and now it's just like, oh, we're going to fund it. It's like, is this like an escalation of commitment, or what happens, right? Like it's a terrible situation to be in. And the report, and the thing that's so funny that you mentioned is the TOD, right? Like the TOD is a huge element of this, adding density to the eastern parts of Montreal. What's so crazy is that the report comes at this from like two opposite angles. On one hand, there's all this talk about we need to densify, we need to do this and that, but then it screams about how you can't have trains near, like on these wide roads. You can't have trains near houses, like short little houses. If it was Miami with high rises, it would be okay. But this is Eastern Montreal, which is just a kind of bucolic communities. So it's not acceptable, right?
Yeah, it's like the same. The people who caved into NIMBYs on transit are not going to suddenly grow a pair and force them to densify. It's like they showed in their actions that they don't have what it takes in them, and it is this very frustrating kind of, it's like left-wing NIMBYism basically, right? It's like it's just the form of NIMBYism, which is just an expression of selfishness that comes out with people who have a set of political identities, you know? Like if you are afraid of whatever immigrants, you're going to be like right-wing NIMBY. You're going to be like no low-income housing, that sort of thing. In Montreal, we have more of a like it's a different flavor of it, and yeah, it's not gonna work if they can't if they can't pull off convincing people that transit in their neighborhood is going to be good, and the downside is going to be, this aerial structure that pops up sometimes. How are they going to like sell your next door? If the unit next door to you is going to be a 5-story apartment building, it's not going to work, you know. So,
well, because they say that the even though we'll get to this, and I think it's ridiculous, they say that the structure being 20 meters would tower over anything around it. 20 meters is not tall for multi-unit housing, right? So that just tells you that what they're saying is the things surrounding this are always going to be towered over by something that is 20 meters tall. I would suggest we go to page 44, because this is one of the many times in the report and in the technical briefing where I feel like we got kind of mixed messages. They said they want to tunnel, but then they give us something like on page 44, they give us these 3 stations. I don't know, are those up on screen now?
Yeah.
Yeah, so what's interesting about these is you can look at each one. The top 2, they mislabeled them, which was a bit careless, but the top 2 are underground stations. And the bottom one is the elevated station. And I think what's the most interesting thing about it is within any of these pictures, the wasted space is the green space. It is the space that is kind of needless mechanical space. So things like break rooms, utility rooms, custodial closets. And when you look at the aerial option, the space taken up by mechanical is tiny. But the space for the underground options, it's like half the station is mechanical space. So that is crazy. But in the technical briefing, I actually asked, what would the price be, or what is the price increase of going underground? And they said a bunch of weird stuff, like that it didn't cost more to go underground, which is not true. It's just doesn't make any sense. But they also said the stations are 100 million more to be underground. And it was funny, they said 100 million more. They didn't say initially what the overground cost would be. They just want you to know it's 100 million more. The overground station cost is 40 million. So that means that it's more than tripling the cost of the station by putting it underground for every single station.
Yet they say, when they said that the tunneling is only 6% cheaper, was that their line? Are they kind of like misleading somewhat by saying, the tunneling, like the tunnel, like the line, but not saying the station that you need to also put in the ground along with the tunnel?
It might be. That is plausible based on the way that they were talking in the press conference. It's plausible that was their story. But the thing that's hilarious about that whole 6% thing is 6% of a reasonably expensive project is nothing. So it's like whatever. But 6% of this project is like $2 billion, which is like a fifth of what the original REM cost. And that's like almost what the Canada line cost. So it's just like when you have such an insanely expensive proposal, 6% starts being a big number.
Yeah, and I think that they're kind of like, oh, well, it's not that big a deal thing. It just doesn't pass the sniff test because you're like, okay, well, it's not that big a deal. What is remarkable about this project? It is extremely expensive, and you're tunneling through suburbia. Those like they stand out as the weirdest choices. Like, didn't you tell me the Melbourne like loop that they're doing is also a suburban tunneled project? I remember you
Yeah, and
talking
it's
about that.
also incredibly expensive.
It's just like what's the thing that's in
It's
common
actually
here?
like it's very similar to this project. Like it's also insanely expensive, and it does like it makes the same problems as this project. So it's kind of funny when you think about it.
Yeah. Okay. And yeah, it's just generally a kind of like the problem of trying to. It's like NIMBYs are like terrorists, you know. You can't negotiate with them. Like, look where you end up. Like, is there any?
The the I recommend we look at page 52 of the report.
All right.
So this was it was quite funny. Uh, in the report here, they talk about. I'll let you get that under camera. Let me know when it's all good to
Yep.
go.
I got a picture on the camera on 52. Ah, yeah. This is the wires.
Yeah, so they said like it was funny. They just kind of gave the scattershot reasons why we couldn't go above ground. So like wires, like transmission lines existing in one place was like given as a reason that you couldn't do this. But if you look at Canadian cities, they're all crisscrossed with tons of transmission lines and tons of above ground transit. And so the idea that like this is somehow unworkable and this is a rationale to put it underground is just it's just a joke. They all
Mm.
at the same time, when I asked was another woman in the press conference asked why can you not put the lines above ground? They were bringing up, they said gas lines, oil lines, like these things exist everywhere. This is not unique.
Yeah.
You know, utilities are not something that only Montreal has, actually.
Yeah, like when you think about how Paris builds at such a a greatly reduced amount, and consider archaeological how much archaeological stuff they come across when they're digging munitions from wars, and just the I don't think that Montreal is unusually bad, like
No,
compared to a lot
definitely
of
not.
cities. They also say, wasn't there there's a bit where they talk about how the rock in Montreal is good, so this will be easy.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like,
Yeah.
well, why is it so expensive
It's
then?
like the rock in Montreal is good, so it only costs $36 billion, right? It's it's actually just unbelievable. Yeah, it's funny. There's a subway station in Toronto that is above ground that goes right under a set of transmission lines.
Well, I'm like,
It,
okay, so can we entrench? Also, like, here's the other thing. Unlike some places, the Hydro-Quebec is a public utility. It's owned by Quebec. I'm sure that it's coming out of the same pot. I'm sure there's a upgrade project on the overhead wires that can be done. Like, how new are they? There's, you know, like,
but that
anyway,
would be, as someone else said to me, that would be asking two government agencies to talk to one another and to collaborate, and that's
yeah.
not in the mandate page.
Yeah, well, it just seems like it should be easier.
They also mentioned there's a train track at one point
Oh
along
no.
this corridor.
Yeah.
So
Like,
that's it's funny because the existing REM goes over so many train lines.
hmm,
Like think about it.
yeah. Well, you
In like
think,
Point St. Charles, it goes over like a whole yard. It goes over the via tracks going into Gare Centrale. On the north end and the West Island, it goes over tracks. It goes over tracks in other places. It goes over like probably 7 or 8 different sets of railway tracks, and they're saying that there's one railway track, so they need to bury the whole thing.
mm, yeah, it's like they do this kind of funny thing where you can see the death by a thousand cuts of it being financially viable. They kind of go like, wow, there's this, so, and there's this, and you're like, it's all of these decisions that just, and then them going like, ah, fuck it, we'll just bury the whole thing. That's what causes it to be this price and take this long to build. Um, yeah. So, and you said the price in Vancouver, I saw in your article you had it. It was 128 million or something like that.
Yeah, to I think they raised the hydro lines. They like put them up on stilts and just like lift that one section so the train can go under it.
Yeah. So which
Yeah, so it's on the order of $100 million, and that's part of the whole joke of all of this, right? Is that everything that they mention in terms of this is not, affordable or whatever, it has this giant cloud hanging over it, which is $36 billion.
yeah, that's
Like,
what has stood out to me when people go like, whenever there's a moment in this report that says it's too expensive, it kind of has this like, what? That's where you drew the line? 36 billion, not 1 cent more, Anyway, so we're
yeah,
the
it's
so shall we do some
it's something.
shall we do some chat questions? And
Yeah.
okay, if we can go through all the technical problems. Hello, very loud. Yes, yes, sorry. Okay, not very good at streaming. Don't do it very often. It's better. Great. Better at streaming. We're improving every time we do this. Okay. Zebra on my head. Jesus Christ. The disheartening thing about transit cost issues in North America is that it seems like there's no political playbook yet for how to get things back under control once the cost disease starts. Yeah, I mean, I think that's why I'm pretty big on getting this thing just throw it out totally as soon as possible, because it's just not even worth. It's just a worth. It's. Do you think this is like a particularly terrible starting point? Like compared to, let's compare it to the original REM de l'Est. What?
Yeah.
What
it's
would you
terrible.
do? Okay, so as a starting point, with REM de l'Est, what would you change? Like, what do you think? Where's the wiggle room there?
I mean, I would probably choose bigger trains, which doesn't have a huge impact. It's just scale up the stations, and then it's just talk about burying the downtown leg, I guess.
Yeah.
Like that's the only thing that I think it's really reasonable to make an argument about changing. You say like, or at least say, I don't like the paternalistic CDPQ attitude of like, you can't tunnel. Yeah, no, like say, if you want to make your case that tunneling is impractical, don't say it's impossible, because it is not impossible. There is a price, name the price, give all of the particular reasons it won't work, etc. And say, like, government, if you want to take that risk, the government can take that risk. And they could even build part of the project and the CDPQ could build the other part or something. And they could guarantee it and say, like, if you lose money, we'll pay it. But that's, I think, the kind of the only serious issue with the first project. I would be okay with it being elevated, but if people aren't, it's reasonable to say, like, if the government needs to pick up that part, they can.
Yeah. I think that's the right call, and I wish they'd been more transparent on just saying that, because I think they had a hard time getting a number because companies didn't want to do it, or engineers just said this is so stupid, it's never going to happen. So I wish that the case had instead said, we think it will be over whatever $10 billion to tunnel into downtown. Just give a fuck off number,
And the reason you do that is because we have a number now. They've told us that the Eastern Network is going to cost $36 billion, and so it's like, big number, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's no reason not to. Like, it's kind of funny, but sitting where we are now, if they had have said the downtown tunnel was $10 billion, it would kind of look like a steal. Like, it's like, you get the project, it's underground in the most controversial part. There you go. And now we get less for more.
And it's something I've run into with people still is a general. So this is an issue with the CDPQ model, because it's not generally about consultation and presenting ideas or taking feedback and then like reworking things. It's a little bit more of a technocratic model where they go like, what problem do you want solved? And then they go away and they come back and they're like, here. It's not like they come back and go like, option B, option C, let's have a vote. Like, it's not really how it works. But this is probably a case of where they should have, at the very least, been transparent. We've done blah because tunnel was 10 billion. And then people like you and I can create the blog post that says like tunneling would be 15. They don't have to, put it as a line item or an option they're considering. Anyway, showing their workings on that, I think, hurt their credibility to some degree. It just made it seem like they were screwing with us when they were. I don't know. I don't know why they made the choice.
Now, Paige, there are some questions that keep coming up. Not necessarily in the chat, but I just want to know: do we want to address some of that stuff now, or do we want to address it later? Because some people have been bringing up like trams and pink line and stuff like that.
Yeah, like if it's in the chat, it'll probably be in the chat. Those questions come up a lot, but we'll do that if it's not mentioned. 32 billion.
Okay.
Why not just buy everyone their own helicopter and pocket the change? So, can you talk about the price per passenger of this project relative to other similar projects, Reece?
Yeah, so I only looked specifically at the stations in across the river. So there's one in Laval, there's one in the east. But the cost per passenger for those stations, based on the 140 million figure given by the people in the presentation today, is about 50,000 per passenger. So you're not getting a helicopter, but you could buy them Tesla if you want, right? Which is bad. Like, the reason that is bad is, first of all, we don't want people driving, so it's bad. But it's also just that from a cost efficiency point of view, transit should be way better. Like, in most places, it is way better than the individual cost of buying every rider a car, right? That is just an indicator of the insanity of this whole situation. In Vancouver, a typical station cost could be about 10,000 per passenger generated, or even less. And that's, the stations in Vancouver aren't that old. The system's like 30 years old. So there's a lot of room to grow that number and bring that cost down. This is a pretty long-term projection. They're saying 3,000 passengers a day in a $140 million station.
Yeah, it's it does kind of do. I don't know if we haven't really covered it, but why do you want transit to be cheap? Like, as a transit lover, why do you want cheap transit projects?
Well, I mean, I think that, and this has been bared out in reality, when it is less expensive to build transit, you build more of it. As with anything, when something is inexpensive, the barrier to purchasing that thing or buying it is lower. And so where is transit pretty cheap? Paris. And what they're doing? They're building 200 kilometers of metro. But also look at Montreal. The REM, the first REM, it wasn't necessarily the world's cheapest, but it was pretty cheap by, Canadian standards. And 67 kilometers are getting built right now because the price was low. And if you go city to city, where's it expensive? New York. How much have they built in the last few decades? Like 4 new stations. It's the correlation is almost perfect between cost and how much gets built, because we mostly are talking about, even outside of democracies, the reality is someone's got to put up the money and the value goes down as the price goes up, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's basically it consumes too much of a pie, and so you end up. And I mean, this is something I really have had I have a serious issue with the STM and the ARTM. They have this just blunt sort of approach to things, like the blue line. Hey, you guys got any ideas for what we could do on transit? Blue line. Like 40 years later, come back. Got any ideas? Blue line. It's just like, and this project, to me, one of the most disappointing things is I assumed that the REM would stir an amount of innovation in the local transit world. Oh, what are they doing over there? Oh, maybe we could use this via existing rail corridor. Oh, maybe we could time this with an infrastructure project going on this bridge, or you know what I mean? And it's like 10 years didn't happen. There's no lessons learnt in this from the REM apart from automation.
Yeah. It's actually crazy, because one of the things that people in Montreal may not realize is really unusual about Montreal is the metro is all underground. And the big thing with the REM, like the first REM, was that, hey, guys, like, let's put some of this above ground. When you're running along a highway or a wide suburban street, you can put it above ground. Vancouver's ranked as one of the most livable cities in the world. The trains run above ground all over the place. These things are not in opposition to one another, because everything is compromised ultimately, right? Maybe it is a bit louder and a bit more annoying, but it's like, well, and then you have transit and more affordable housing, and those things are just worth so much more than like the slight annoyance of a small number of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does frustrate me, and a lot that I live on the line and didn't get. No one asked me, what do you think of a REM? You know what I mean? Like a politician didn't come to my door and go, hey, we're walking down the street and we're just seeing how everyone feels. Like, did I need to fucking go march around with a sign like these dickbags, with this sign and say, like, I want it. By the way, for every one of those boomers who has a sign that, like, it's like literally, do these people look like they care about transit? Their poster has got cars on it being oppressed by transit. It's like they're not environmentalists. They just don't want sound and shadows, And yeah, it's just frustrating. You're like, seriously, like there was polling done. It showed that there was general Montreal-wide support, for the project, but that was all ignored because they were unable. They just didn't have the backbone to stand up to these the people living in next to the Green Line. And it's like their behavior is so appalling to me because they had the Green Line. They didn't need the REM. The REM's not really for them. It's for people living in Montreal Est. And as a result, we've come up with this, which is worse because they're going to have to transfer to the Green Line. Like, I think this timed out will be the same amount of time as a bus and significantly slower than driving, right?
Yeah, and the thing that's the funniest about this is it's actually worse for existing Green Line riders because if you were getting a seat when you're getting on the train before, like the trains are going to be packed when they get to central Montreal, right?
That's a really good point. Yeah, and like ask anyone who lives on the Orange Line here. It's frustrating. You have to kind of push back your start time at work if you can. You try to avoid the peak times. I used to live on it.
Yeah, you might have to wait a train if it's too busy, right? Like it's not fun.
Yeah. Okay, so what else have we got here? Are you using the width?
Pardon me?
You want to talk about, what was it that you wanted to talk about?
Like the questions or more from the report?
Did you have another report thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you had a picture. There's a couple graphics. There's one on page 54, but also on 55 that are like showing the structure, what it would have to look like if it was above ground, right?
Yeah.
What it would have to look like.
Okay, so that this is a section that I can really get into. So, and I mean, this is kind of just what I noticed because it's more of the like aesthetics side of things. And
again, 10 seconds. Someone has said in the chat, and this is beautiful. Are any politicians actually supportive of this new plan? Like that's unthinkable, right?
They love it. Yeah, no, it's their favorite. It is quite. It's pretty funny actually. The politicians all just being like, "This is great." It's like, what could they have said? Like they come up, they go like, "We've come up with a design for a REM." Oh, okay. Yeah, it's going to run straight over your children's bodies and crush them. Oh, okay. This is great. I'm excited. I'm excited about this. It's like when they got told $36 billion, their head should have fucking caught on fire. Like they should have been like, "Oh my god,"
But wasn't there a news article about the mayor's take on this?
Yeah, she's excited. I'm excited. It's like, well, you shouldn't be excited. This will never happen. Like it's like, because she campaigned on this thing called the Pink Line, which would also be in this kind of like ballpark number, I would guess, a diagonally tunneled metro line right across Montreal. And yeah, it is the mistake of her mayoralty. Like the case gave her a plausible pink line. It went to the same endpoint, and then she just needed to solve for the Lachine part of a line. Probably doable with a tram or something like that. And she probably could have finished her mayoralty being like, I came on the pink line and I fucking did it, Like,
yeah, it's so common that politicians don't get that, that they don't get an opportunity to build the project that they campaign on.
Yeah, and instead she turned it down and is like, and this, it's not the pink line, it's not going to be built. It's just like, it doesn't.
So apparently she said it was a great win that they were burying it through these suburbs. And like there was another guy on Twitter who was, I think, a mayor or something, who said that this is a great win for us. And it's like, no, it's not a win because it's never getting built, right? So it's actually just it's a loss because it costs money and time.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's a fantasy win because it doesn't exist and it won't exist. So it's kind of like being like, oh, we're gonna, we're putting together a Quidditch team, and it's gonna be a great win. It's just like this. Just you, I hate to tell it you guys, but broomsticks don't fly. Like it's not. This is a non-existent thing. So there's no winning to be done. I mean, it's just in your head. I wonder. I mean, they might be like lying in bed at night having these dreams, and everyone's like, "You're so good at being a mayor. Thanks for bringing us transit." But like, it's just detached from reality. So I don't know, like, if at this point how many of the mayors are um, able to comprehend that this won't happen, like actually understand that and are just being cynical, being like, oh, I've got 8 more years left that I'm hoping to be in politics, and then I'll fuck off to provincial politics, or if they actually don't realize that this thing's dead in the water. The provincial government has already said that it needs to be revisited. Actually, and this brings me to my fucking shtick. Do you want me to do my shtick?
I do. Please do it. Fire
Okay.
away. Stick away.
Okay.
Stick
So
'em.
throughout this is just my little observation. There are tons and tons of real fun images throughout this document. And most of them, like, first of all, are Google Maps. And that strikes me as so weird. If you're going to spend just a fortune, wouldn't you go out there with an old camera and a tripod and just take your own pictures? It's in Montreal. Like, why couldn't they have just gone and taken the image? It makes no sense to me that the amount of effort that they put into this was to just like go on Google Maps and screenshot the location down the road, right? Also, maybe you go along to the location, you realize something, being in a physical location. It's probably worth it. It's $36 billion. So on all of these pictures, you have the original and then the horrible viaducted, destroyed version of the project, right? And I was assuming at first, oh, this is probably a CAD software package that lets you do like shadow mapping or something, because those exist. And it has like a Google Maps plugin so that you can see how the thing will look to a Google Maps, like to a user in any location. Just drop your building in and then have a look at it, right? But no, this is a Photoshop job. You can tell because if you look at the picture here, you can see the vanishing point disappears across the road. So here's a zoomed in version of it. So the viaduct goes across the road here. So this is all just eyeballed in to the image using like warping tools. They rendered it out, and then we're like, oh, okay. Well, that looks good. And then this is where it starts to get like, so first of all, doesn't need to look like that. And as you've already covered, these viaducts don't need to be this tall at all, right, in the first place. So this isn't real. This isn't an accurate representation of what it will look like. And I think the worst thing is that if you look at this image, you'll notice it looks kind of shit, right? Like just generally, the street, the condition of it's not very good. So I jumped on Google Maps and went to the location. So this is the location, right? Now people can see, or should be able to see, my Google Maps install. So here's the location, matched it all up, same time of year, but this is from 2 years ago. So if you show more dates, you'll be able to see that there's lots of different dates, and the most recent date looks like this. Verdant and green, nice looking street, right? And every date before that looks nice and green and is taken in summer. They went to the date that was winter and selected that image so it could look as shit as possible. So in this report, there's this bias. This reveals it. They wanted it to look bad. They didn't want to go like, this is what viaduct would look like. Here is viaduct. They were like, we will find a worse looking viaduct. And of course, like, to give them the benefit of the doubt, I was like, well, maybe what's going on is the software, or they screenshotted. They have an archive of files from 2020, despite that being before the project was announced. Like this is from just like a month before the project was announced by the case. But whatever, maybe they just happen to have 2020s, as a file. So I jumped on the, I went through the document a bit more, and I found over on this page. Actually, Reece, do you have any thoughts so far? Are you enjoying my little crime drama here?
No, I'm enjoying it. It's not an accurate representation of what it would look like. It's totally sandbagged. But what page are you looking at now?
I'm now on 66. So we're looking at the
66.
second image.
Oh, at 66?
Yeah. Oh, 68, sorry.
Okay.
So there's another, I mean, there's lots of these, right? This is another one where you have...
I mean, it looks like it's like 50 meters tall in this picture.
And there are like lots of them actually. This is another one. I don't know if you can see this, Reece. If you can, I'm not sure exactly what page it's on.
Yeah. I can see that.
If you ever look at this one, right? Like the look at the shadow. Here's the shadow. You have a straight road and a straight viaduct. Now I'm not. This is kind of funny because this is the shit that the NIMBYs did. They'd be like dissecting the images. It looks too good, and now we're saying like, oh, this looks bad. But it's just like. This is a public agency. They're supposed to be. This was the point. Oh, the case. They're all business. They've got these motives. This is a public institution. This is where we're at least honesty is the thing we're expecting. We're not expecting a sales pitch. We want a fucking report. So we commission. So this image, you can see the shadow. It curves up over the sidewalk somehow, and then it disappears behind the station. So again, it's just like this is a Photoshop job. And then I think this is where it gets really ridiculous, Reece, and you won't be able to see this, but when you look back to this live stream, it's a classic. This one.
What one is it?
So on page 69, we have the winter from 2020 shot, right? But then on page 68, oh, it's nice and green. It's nice and green and summery, right? And the shadows cast, on this beautiful green scene, Because they're making the case in this image, it's going to ruin nature. So I went to Google Maps again to try to find where this was, and it was a little bit harder to find. So here it is on Google Maps. And, you can recognize this car, Now, this one was the most recent one shot. So the policy seems to be, it's not that they're stuck with images from 1 year. And when you change the date on this, I noticed, because I'm like, this is an industrial area. This looks very nice for an industrial area. If you change the date on this to the winter of 2020, when the other one's from, it is like a nightmare hellscape. You can see the smokestacks of the oil refinery behind the trees. Everything's dead. The chain link fence doesn't have anything on it at all to cover it up. And you look at this, and there's a line in the report here, right? You said something about them saying it's too industrial looking, the infrastructure.
Yeah.
Right? So when you look at this and you think, oh, it's too industrial, you're like, yeah, it would fit right in here. No one would give a shit about there being a viaduct down the side of this road. It is ugly, dead. It's an industrial park with tons of space, so you can see there's these huge green curbs alongside on both sides that give plenty of space for anything to be put in. So I just think like,
and that's not hurting anyone in that location. What is the benefit of putting it? If you're going down through a dense area, a residential area, there is an argument. It might be a bad argument, but there is an argument to be made that below ground might have less impact. But in an industrial area, what is the justification for burying it at 100 million per station?
Well, it seems to me like they find in any area, everywhere that they go, oh, well, there's a power line over there. Oh, I heard that there was a graveyard here at some point, so we wouldn't want to go over the top. Let's go underneath that, and they seem to be able to kind of, that's the problem with the whole report. It seems to just have this, they went like, we want a tunnel, and then they worked backwards from there. Most of the report is an argument against is an argument against going above ground or on viaducts. And here's what really gets me, Reece. This is what makes me so angry about this fucking report. This is a report that should be called 111 pages of why NIMBYs are right. And the shitty thing about it is that this report will be pulled out in decades to come by the NIMBYs saying something like, in the ARTM's own report in 2023, they made the case that it was unacceptable to have this here. Yet the government of the future is trying to build this. It's unbelievable, you know? So they have given them a fucking huge shotgun, and they're going to blast us with it for the rest of time. They are, and this is the fucking.
No, it's
this again.
It's
the fucking. Sorry, Reece, I'm getting like worked up. But
it's the thing.
These fucking idiots. Because the government of Quebec has already said to them, you're going to need to cut the cost. You're going to need to lower the price here. These fucking idiots have gone and painted themselves into a corner because the way they're going to have to cut the cost is by putting it above ground. And so people won't be going government of the future. People in 2024 will be saying, this fucking viaduct you said in your report last year was not a good idea. So it's just so stupid. I don't understand it.
I mean, okay, this is let me find this here. There's a great thing on page. Hey, oh,
I got a little bit.
I need to find. I need to find the.
By the way,
is it?
If you would like to see those two Google Map locations, they're in the description. Direct linked to the time, and you can see for yourself that we are being deceived by our own transit agency.
This page 71 in the report, bottom of the page.
Uh-huh.
A second, last two paragraphs. Just read that.
Okay, we're going to talk about highways. Oh, the highway. We wouldn't want to build a highway, which you're going to have to do because. Okay, so the auto route, the elevated auto route that we have is an example of the impact of an aerial structure that is creates an urban scar comparable to the sector, residential sector of Pointe-aux-Trembles. So this is the scar, the damage, the damaging a neighborhood argument. So what are your thoughts on that, Reece? Is this your rant?
Well, they show a picture of the expressway on the next page, and it literally looks nothing like the thing that they've rendered. As stupid as the thing that they rendered on the other pictures was, it looks nothing like it because it's a highway. And highways are obviously going to be taller, they're going to be wider, and they're going to have cars all over them, which means no one's going to want to live next to them. And as you can see, they find the most desolate possible picture of the highway to show that this is like a highway. It will destroy the community.
Mm-hmm. So this is a pretty kind of...
That's a NIMBY thing.
It's so different, like in every way. Highways are 5-6 times wider. Many times smaller, all hours of the day, noise, right? Like this is another thing. The REM actually does get turned off for 4 hours, you know, where there's absolutely no noise from it, for example. And it's the sound that it makes is kind of like this kind of staticky, white noisy sort of sound, right? When it goes past, it's just not the same. And it feels like they're kind of playing out of the playbook of like the early environmental or urbanist movement, right? So
yeah, that's all it is.
It's like messaging language on like, oh, we wouldn't want to. It's like, I don't think the REM de l'Est had anyone getting evicted. These highway projects had like entire neighborhoods getting demolished. I mean, I made that point in my videos, right? The section on Notre Dame where the REM de l'Est was proposed to be built was a demolished neighborhood that was demolished for a highway that was going to be put there that never happened, right? So they're just making use of the space of a previous generation's mistakes. But there were no demolitions. It was like gas stations where all the stations were going. from what I know. So it's just like that alone. You're like, okay, it's just not, because why? Highways are really wide. This is not, you know? Yeah. I know, it's just another like. Did you find, like, just in general? Didn't you ask a question about whether they their familiarity with a Vancouver-based solution for something, and they were like, oh, we're not familiar with Vancouver.
Yeah, so I just said, Vancouver has a lot of utilities, power lines, railway lines. The SkyTrain goes over them, around them. It's not a huge issue. And the guy just said, I have no experience with the Vancouver system. Maybe they have a solution, but we don't know what that solution is. And for Montreal, this doesn't work.
Yeah, and it's like, when you think, like, I did the numbers on it, let's assume that they spent $1 million to get a couple of real ringers, from different places that have automated networks in, like a couple of 200, 300,000, dollar a year people. That would still be, it would still be 36,000 times less expensive than the REM, right?
Yeah.
Than this proposed project. So it's just like, why would they not have pay top dollar to get a few people that are familiar? Like, obviously, anyone that knows any particular solution that can, say, avoid underground stations or something is going to immediately pay for themselves. So it's this kind of Google Maps image kind of problem where you just get the sense that they were so lazy with their kind of decision to go this route and just wasted time. Like, this report to me seems like a waste of time. And it's actually probably worse because it is an arsenal of material for NIMBYs of the future. I hate it so much.
And it's crazy because we're kind of in this era where NIMBYism is being called out for what it is. And it's like they had to sneak this last one in so that for another couple decades they can come and say, we don't want it to be like this. And it's just it's so clear that they cherry picked every single example in here to make it look bad. I mean, they literally when you think of cities page with elevated trains that are modern and nice, what city do you think of? And why is it Miami? like it just doesn't make sense.
They have these pictures in Miami, which, like, of the system in Miami, and it looks really nice.
This is the thing that's hilarious. The execution is so bad that they actually found a system that does look pretty good.
Yeah. I don't know what page it's on, but
it's on 73.
73. Yeah. So because you can flip between the renderings and the Miami picture and go like, well, that looks like a place I'd like to be. Yeah, here it is. So, like, you look at it and you're like, it's like, this isn't even a rendering. It's a real picture. It looks great. There's another at night, and you look at it and you're like, oh, cool. There's like it's a big, long linear park down the whole thing. That looks awesome, And then you look at the one that they imagine, and it's just like, it's like a shadow, just a horrible arterial boulevard, just casting this huge shadow over everyone, like Darth Vader transit. Oh, the other thing, did you see that one which had like which had the picture, which was just taken from that ridiculous angle that made it look like a wall?
Yeah. Okay, let me find that.
What page is that on?
That is on page, I think it's up here. It's on page 58.
58. This one's great. It is like they were like, it's like they were like doing a visual trick, right? On the viewer. Yeah. 58. Okay, yeah. It's like, see, this picture here it's just like that. You look at it for a while and you're like, what even is that? And you're like, oh, it's like if they just went across the road and pushed their head against it. It's like if you were like, here's here's my paintbrush, just for the document scanner. Oh, and I put it here, and it's like, man, that's the biggest paintbrush I've ever seen in my life. Just, it's just ridiculous. Like, anyway, yeah, that's a good one.
It's quite funny because they also showed some examples from from France. That actually looked pretty good in my opinion. It's on page 75, but it's quite funny because they say, well, in Paris, they have a 20-lane street, so of course they could do it.
Oh yeah. Well, they did not like the route has these massive arterials through industrial land, right? Yeah, this. I mean, there's this thing, right, with some of the with a lot of this stuff. The wider the street is, the more plausible the elevated transit is, with it looking kind
Yeah.
of nice. The nice if it's just sitting in a field by itself and it's just over there. So a lot of the time, yeah, I kind of was thinking about this the other day. You know, when they moved the plan for this is okay. This new a bit of a topic here that sometimes you have a line, oh, there was no consultation around the REM de l'Est, and you're kind of like, I'll be like, yeah, well, you know, it's because of a model, and then I'll be like, well, no, wait a minute, there was. They changed the route, they changed the design of the structures, and that was all based on feedback. I went to a consultation, you know, and they answered questions I had, and you're like, no, they did. Like, they did actually consult. I can tell you, I haven't been consulted on this.
Too.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. They did the downtown tunnel. No, they were doing the consulting. You know, they didn't want the mayor to reject it like she did, so they were going and doing the things that they could do for, you know, a reasonably low cost. You know, like, oh sure, like why not make it look? Why not do this? You know, and so I was thinking the decision to put it onto this existing rail corridor. Like in some ways, the street that it was on, which I think was Sherbrooke, was possibly a better choice, because you look at some of these images, especially the Miami ones, and you go like, yeah, you know, if you make a deal with the residents, hey, we're going to knock out a couple of lanes of traffic here, so quieter street overall, and you're getting a linear park, it starts to kind of be like, oh, okay, yeah, sure, it's a fair deal. And I think a lot of the problem with the NIMBYs is they're not even like operating rationally. They're just people who drive cars or are car culture enthusiasts, and they don't go like, oh yeah, if it comes with a bike lane and like, and I don't drive a car anyway, so I don't mind if parking's knocked out. Sure, but they're just processing it like, you know, they're not seeing it like that at all, right?
Yeah, and I just think the thing I find the most funny is that in all of the pictures they show, I think possibly every picture they show of another city besides Montreal, there is some form of housing and development adjacent to the elevated train.
Mm-hmm.
It's as if it works in other cities. It's not, there's not a riot, you know, they have it.
Yeah.
Vancouver, Paris.
Well, how do people react in Vancouver when a SkyTrain line is proposed and it's going to have aerial structures? Just
usually they're kind of like, you know, how do we accelerate this? Is it going to be delayed? Like, can we get it sooner? Like, generally, you know, like there was a huge advocacy group in Surrey, which is where I'm from in Vancouver, that desperately wanted a SkyTrain. They just want, like, give us a SkyTrain. And so now they're getting one. They're getting a 18-kilometer fully elevated SkyTrain extension in Surrey and Langley. And yeah, it's 100% above ground. I haven't heard, legitimately have not heard any protest. And it goes right near lots of houses.
And I think like you're a SkyTrain kid, right? Like you're a product of a generation of people who grew up where the SkyTrain was always there as early as you can remember, right? Yeah. So I think like I think that a lot of what's going on here is just this lack of familiarity with what it means to get something like the REM in your neighborhood. We still haven't gotten to ride it, you know? Obviously, this is the biggest problem with the REM de l'Est when it was proposed, was that they hadn't opened the first REM yet. So they didn't have this like weight of the public going like, oh, I want that. But you can just tell that like in time, people will be like, oh, what the fuck? Why didn't they, what was the issue again? Oh, the viaducts? Who gives a fuck about that? You know, like, you know, and it's like, oh, not even the viaducts. It was like a lot of the REM de l'Est was tunneled, you know? It was the viaducts in the places where there should have been viaducts.
It's so funny because I remember as a kid, they were building one of the new SkyTrain lines. And I remember my parents drove a lot, so I ended up driving a lot. But we would drive by this one part of town, and it would be like once every 2 weeks. and they were doing the elevated construction. It was like, oh my God, every 2 weeks, it would just like, it would extend so much further. And so the time horizon of these projects, it's measured in like, 3-4 years. It's not like a tunnel project where it's 10 years, and 10 years feels like you're a different person in 10 years, and 10 years of disruption. The thing is, with the elevated structure, they can just build it and then they're kind of out of the way. The street is in its final format for a few years until the whole project is done, but the construction is done. So you're not really being disrupted. Whereas with the tunneling, they got to keep taking dirt out, until the tunneling is done. And they got to ship materials in. And so the disruption lasts so much longer. So it's like the rationale as a citizen is so much better with the elevated, because it's like we get to see it get done really quickly. And then it's just all anticipation for it to open, versus it being like on Eglinton in Toronto, just like 10 years of construction and just like, suffering through it. I want it to be done. Whereas with the elevated, it's just sort of like, it's going to be open soon. Yay.
Yeah. I mean, that's another point, right? Like, you almost want to be like, oh, you want tunnel, eh? You got it. Here comes the cut and cover. Oh, we're going to redo the sewers, and we're going to be blah, blah, blah. It's all at the same time. Remember, do you know what it was like to live on P-Nerf, where they were just putting in a fucking bus lane? Well, guess what? This is going to be you've never seen this amount of disruption. You're going to be walking over planks. You're going to have mud on your shoes when you come inside. Like, it's just, that's a kind of a rationality to it, where you're like, maybe, I don't know, once in a while I get woken up at night or woken up in the morning by the REM or something like that going past. But like, when you add the consecutive hours of jackhammering, digging, beeping like construction equipment for like 4 years that they're going to hear if they go for the tunnel option, is that actually a more disruptive net amount of time?
Yeah, and I just also think that, and I'm open to the idea that maybe there's something wrong with the current trains and they need to be greased better or something. I've lived meters away from the SkyTrain. I've lived next to the GO train, like literally directly next to. They're just not that loud, and they pass pretty quickly. Like, when you're comparing it to a major road, like if you go to Toronto near the 401 and you just exist, it's just a constant drone, right? And with the train, it's like, okay, every couple of minutes, it's a ding, 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 and it's gone, right? And it's just impossible to seriously compare them and pretend they're the same, right? And there is this element too of just, you're living in a city. At some point, you have to accept that, like, yeah, if the city densifies, you know what? It's also going to be louder. Like, the reality is that the city grows, it's going to be a bit louder. You're going to have more neighbors. There's going to be more people walking around late at night because they were at a party. It's sort of this attitude of like, we shall not grow, and I want my little corner of paradise to stay the same forever, and I will do that at the expense of everyone else. That's just really terrible.
I think there's a kind of element, I thought about doing this as a video at one point, of is it just rational? When we're working on removing level crossings, and just the kind of idea of just buying off farmers, right? Just buying off NIMBYs, being like, here is a project we would like to do. We are making an offer of a 10% above current assessed value purchase of properties on the route if you don't want to live on this line, because that would be, and then they take the property and they turn it into social housing, or they turn it into bits and pieces they might need for the project for some reason, everything from crew housing to like places for a fucking piece of equipment, and just do that. Like, it's
would that be too expensive though, Paige? Wouldn't that be too expensive?
Exactly. How many houses can you buy for $36 billion? And you can already tell it's going to be high because it's $50,000 per rider near a station, right? So it's just, you could probably buy every single house on the route, is my guess. And the thing is, most people are going to be like, I like this house, I won't take the 10% offer. But there's definitely got to be look, you got to give them a number so that you could just take this and buy a house a block back if you're this worried about this,
And a lot of people are going to say, hell no, like, I don't want to sell my valuable real estate that I'm going to have a station. Like, no, I'm going to add an extra unit in the back.
Yeah. Well, that's the crazy thing, right? Like, you basically, most of the people living along the line the house value was compensated for. I mean, the winners of it are everyone else in the neighborhood who's just a little bit further away and has no other negative externalities. And there are negatives, you know, and obviously, like a lot of this stuff is just a negative of like it changing. Like people just like things that are the same and don't want that change, as you've said. But like, yeah, it's still compensated for by the fact that you now have rapid transit, you know, near your house. So yeah. Anyway, even the people
But
on the
that's a lot
Green Line.
less. That's a lot less valuable when when the rapid transit doesn't go downtown. It doesn't let you connect to the rest of the region, right?
Yeah.
Which is a joke. It's the joke of all of this. There's so many incoherent decisions made that don't align with the supposed priorities. Like it's social acceptability, except you're gonna be known as one of the people who lives on that like weird suburban line that's like a people mover, and you know it's like you're that guy who's got to go. It's like riding some weird bus at the end of the line. Like, oh yeah, I got to leave the party 2 hours early so I can get to the Eastern Structuring Network
Yeah.
station so I can go home. It's really weird. And the
Yeah.
thing that's funny about all of this is now maybe we should get into the pink line stuff and like talk about like that, because a lot of people have been asking me, not in the chat but in general, like, and they asked this in the presentation as well, why don't we just extend the metro? And the people kept saying that's not our mandate. Our mandate is to study an automated light system like the REM.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, well, that's exactly why the model of a case exists, right? To be a little bit more open-minded to solutions than you told us you want a hamburger, one hamburger, you know? It's just like, oh, well, maybe I want some, no sauce, hamburger. And it's just like a very, you know.
Well, and you can see even in the things that they did assess, they didn't honestly assess the elevated as an option. And as you said, now it's going to be like, what the hell are they supposed to do? They can't put it above ground now after they said that it's going to be like the Berlin Wall, right?
Yeah.
Like so it's so weird what they've done here. They're like, oh, could we phase it? And the thing that's so funny is it's like phasing it's not going to make it less expensive. It's as it densifies, as you say, these are going to be the later phases. Like that's the thing about the first REM. They phased it, but it's not a phased construction. It's phased opening, right? It's like the parts that took a little longer to build can open later. It's not like we're going to build this in 10 years, because then you create all the problems because everyone does buy up the land. And then the land does already have the huge value increase.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, it's like with inflation after all those years, with all those phases, the funny thing is people will look back at it, do the math and be like, it cost even more, you know? I mean, there is like, would you say that if this was part of a general tunneling expertise sort of development, you know, that this would make sense? Like we're going to get good at building tunnel transits. This itself is the first phase, and then there will be more. We're going to then go back into downtown and build that line you outlined in your Substack the other day. That's a question.
Are you saying, do I think that makes sense? Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Like as in like, could that be the argument for, oh, we're tunneling this because we're just going to tunnel everything in future and we're going to build expertise in tunneling, something like that?
It honestly, if I'm being completely honest, it could be. It could be like when you look at the places that have gotten so good at tunneling, like Spain and Korea. They basically tunnel almost everything, but they cut and cover. And it's funny when you go and you look at the like new developments in Madrid, they would go in a place like Eastern Montreal, they'd plan out the whole development, and then they'd like dig a trench down the middle, put the train in, and then just cover it over and put some buildings around it. And it's like, yeah, that would be a valid argument, but it's not the argument they're making. Cut and cover is not in this thing anywhere, despite them. And they said the streets are too. Well, I mean, you couldn't cut and cover because they said the streets that are 6 or 8 lanes wide are too narrow, too narrow for an elevated. So clearly, much too narrow for cut and cover.
Yeah, I mean the other point. Something I wanted to talk about just as in general. If you lived in Pointe-aux-Trembles and your mayor is like, you know, the arrondissement's councillor is saying like, oh, 2 thumbs up, this is great. Would you prefer to live there with the previous plan or with this current plan? Like, have they gotten a good deal out of this? The people that live on the proposed route?
I don't believe so, because the train doesn't go all the way downtown now. And I mean, I'm probably unusual in this, but I don't like transferring. I really don't like transferring. If I can ride a single vehicle for my whole trip, it's just so much easier and less stressful. You don't lose your seat. And if I'm in Pointe-aux-Trembles, I'm going to have a seat every time. Now it's like, oh, you're going to have to go get on the green line every time to go anywhere within the actual city, right? So it's worse in that situation. But also, like the honest truth is that it's not going to get built now. So if I'm in Pointe-aux-Trembles, I was going to get a rapid, frequent REM service to downtown Montreal every 2 or 3 minutes until 1:30 a.m. And now I'm going to be riding a bus or more likely driving.
Yeah.
And actually, the ARTM does have a rail line there that they run about 6 trains a day on. And there's not a clear plan to improve that. I think they do mention the report, but it's mostly just like, well, would this mess up our existing very popular 6 trains a day? And the answer is, I think, no.
Well, so this is kind of a wider point of like, what else could you do? What else could you spend money on? Pink Line trams, right? Like, one of the things that I think would be just a better use of money, easy one, is turning the EXO network into something that looks like the GO trains in Toronto. Just all those stations, we're going to fucking massively upzone them. We're going to start running. The goal is to every 20 minutes have a train. Maybe we'll achieve that in 20 years. So what do we need to do? We're going to buy line off the freight companies. We're going to electrify, the system. We're going to upgrade the platforms. All that sort of stuff, right? That I think you would agree is just like, yeah, do that, sure. Sounds good.
That's a plausible, $15 billion project over 20 years.
There's one EXO line that goes out to the Saint-Hubert airport. I was going past the other day and I was like, oh, I didn't realize there was an EXO line to this. That seems like it would be a good candidate for a REM. If that airport is being looked at as a second airport for discount carriers, all those people that are going to be going in there, it's all built. It's kind of weird. It feels like a new development, big street with no cars on it. And yeah, it's like, okay, yeah, that should be that for sure, as an airport interconnect, some sort of goal of like you can fly into Trudeau and then fly out of Saint-Hubert to the next destination, if you're a snowbird or something like that,
Yeah, I think that it's just there's this general sense where it's like the ARTM has this whole existing network, and what are they doing to make it better? Right? Like, I don't see it. There's no clear, like, they made this whole report to shut down the idea of doing this. But I see very little from the ARTM saying what they actually will do. It's like, what is an option? Because you guys clearly don't think elevators is an option. And the issue, I think, with a lot of what you're saying, Paige, is when you start saying that, like, we can't build a thing under a power line, it's like, well, how are you going to upgrade the EXO? Because, like, there's power lines in Montreal, in a bunch of places. It's like, this isn't just NIMBY fuel against future REM projects. It's like, oh, there's a power line. Like, you guys can't construct something there. It's like, it's fuel for all future NIMBYism. They might say this housing project can't go in because it's too tall and it'll impose on the surrounding buildings, like they say in this article, they say in this report.
Yeah, they're basically kind of, it's weird. They're a very weirdly negative organization. I remember during their kind of campaign against the REM, they put out that report saying like simultaneously that the traffic would be low, but also that they would need to change their bus lines. And it was like, so you guys didn't calculate, you didn't rejiggle your bus lines before doing your calculation? I think that would probably change the amount of traffic that's going to be on it. Just this kind of like cynical, worst case in every single scenario bracket. And that's what happened with their aerial costing, when they imagined the biggest possible aerial structure with the most concrete, and then they compare it against like a tunnel that's like efficiently built, and it's just like they just they're playing with the numbers. We're messing with reality,
and
right?
The thing that's so weird is that if you have this reputation of being very negative and not getting a lot done, which I think the ARTM has, right? The solution to that is to come out swinging and say, like, we can like it's quite weird. In the presentation they were saying, oh, like the cost is really the same as the REM proposed by CDPQ. It's just that we have to do these, we have to consider higher interest rates, and we have to, and it's like we have a 50% contingency. And it's like, why do you need a 50% contingency and CDPQ doesn't need a 50% contingency? Like that's kind of the point of all this, right?
It kind of reminds me. I've got it around the book that you gave me. Where is it? I don't know where it is. You gave me a book that was on basically on mega projects, right? Like, what lessons do you think in that book? What's it called? How to do big things? Was it?
Yeah, it's called I think how
How
big things get done.
Yeah, here it is.
Yeah.
So what in this book would you say is most kind of would be most important for people who proposed this to read and understand?
I mean, just getting things done quickly, right? Like they when they were saying it's going to take 13 years to do this, in the book he says like you need to shrink the timeline as small as possible so that the risk of something like a pandemic happening is kind of shrunk as small as possible, so you reduce your risk. He said, you know, you start by reducing as many risks as you can, and then you mitigate the risks that you have left. And looking at this plan, I think what he'd say is like, well, do you really need to take the risk of tunneling the whole thing everywhere? Like that's a risky proposition. Well, where could you not tunnel it? Right. And they don't come at it from the perspective of like of risk and of real considerations. Like this whole presentation has report has the sense of we're not going to build this all over it, right? Which is bad because it means that when people say like, well, this is good, we have an idea what automated metro would be now, let's go look at BRT and trams. This isn't an accurate assessment. And so like any assessment you do based on this is flawed. And so it's just bad up and down.
It's like it's kind of like saying like what sort of housing should we build, and deciding that the example that you're going to use of row housing is like a really affluent person's like Greystone in New York, and then you're like, it's too expensive to do row housing. It's just not actually going to let us use it as a comparable to benchmark against other things. But and it's in the end, and in general, I think this whole conversation we're having and why I'm happy to like punch fist things so hard is because it's not gonna. We're gonna be vindicated. It's not gonna fucking work out. You know, any politician watching, like this isn't gonna go to plan, and you're not gonna want to be associated with it. You know, so
it's like it's more expensive than possibly every transit project. Like if you actually go historically, Paige, I would bet you this plan is more expensive than the first REM and the entire metro built.
Yeah,
for sure. Like I have no doubt. So it's appalling. It would serve, they say, 600,000 residents. So you're spending more than the entire existing system that Montreal has on what, like, is this about 10% of the population of the region? Something like that?
A little bit over that, but yeah. And like you're giving them a worse thing, right? Like then what you could give them for less, as far as the utility of a transit. It's like someone wants to go to the airport for a flight. It's like it's a transit system that is really good for people living in Montreal East wanting to go to Montreal East. So you want to go see your buddy in a neighboring suburb up there, well, it's you're not going to have to do the transfer. But because of a transfer, you wanting to get onto the rest of the island, go to the South Shore, you know, go up to like the Orange Line in Laval for a show at the venue there, Central Bell, I think it is. You just this is worse. So it's crazy, really, you know. Yeah, I guess they get a metro, a shit one.
The thing that blows my mind is that people are now talking about like, oh, like we have this much money, we should just build metro and stuff. And it's like, well, no, that's the worst part about this is it's like open this completely stupid conversation.
Let's talk about the stupids, starting off with a Green Line extension.
Yeah, so a Green Line extension is silly because it's just, you know, like the whole point of this is that it's an express, Réseau Express Metropolitan. And the green line already takes quite a bit of time to get out to the eastern end. So now you're talking about like doubling that time because it would be going twice as far. So it would take longer. It's expensive because it does have to be underground because of the rubber tires. Or at least it's going to have to be on a really ugly elevated structure that's like fully enclosed. So that's non-workable. It's slow and it's already crowded, right? So you have the same capacity issues that you would already have.
So like when we talk about speed, the top speed of the metro is 60 something kilometers an hour?
72.
72. Okay. And the top speed of a automated light rail system can be.
Well, it could be over 100. It'll be at least 100.
Okay. So there's that contributes to the speed difference. There's also the station spacing, right?
Yeah.
It stops. It's a little bit like I mean it's a highway. It's a rapid system, and they're not comparable. Like the metro is like a bit of a people mover in an airport to move like an escalator. It's like lots and lots of people being moved around in a smaller space. It's really good for high density areas downtown, you know, that sort of thing. Or like you get into the metro system and then you move just a little bit and then you get off. But the REM is made as a kind of in between for commuter rail and a metro. It's this medium distance solution. Yeah, I think a lot of people miss that. The other thing I think is if cost is the problem, we know from the blue line that extending the green line is not going to make it cheaper. The blue line
Yeah.
is the blue line the same amount per kilometer?
Yeah.
What is it?
Basically, which
Yeah.
is actually, when you think about that, unbelievable because the blue line has way bigger trains. Like
Yeah.
it's not a light system. So
Yeah.
they basically somehow managed to take, and the blue line, we were already talking about it being egregiously expensive. And they have like, this is kind of on like a per capacity basis. It's like 2 or 3 times more expensive than the blue line extension.
Yeah. So it doesn't really solve the problem. I mean, the green line could be extended a bit, but I would say you probably want to do your green line extension when the stations along the green line become destination stations for high density living. So I really don't think it makes sense to extend that until you have you conceivably have people who get dropped off at a green line station and then go 2 stations either direction all the time for like their work or whatever. It would be the metro lines should have high density above them. That's when you know I think you're doing it right with the metro lines. And there probably is a conversation to have at some point about getting off the rubber tire system or automating the lines. Like they will need an upgrade at some point. Again, that's what the RTM could start talking about. You know, like
Yeah, they
spend
don't.
time studying
It's
that.
funny, even when they're talking about expanding the green line capacity in this report, I don't think they mention automation, which is kind of crazy. Like that would be the kind of obvious thing to do, because it's what Paris does. I mean, like every new line. So Paris is doing Grand Paris Express, as I said. Every new line they build is fully automated, and they're working their way kind of backwards to automate the older lines. So like every 5 years or so, they've been automating another older line.
Yeah. And I will say, like, actually, it's probably time for some compliments. They are doing automation. Great. You know, they didn't. It would have been so crazy. We would have lost our shit even more than we already have. But at least they are like, okay, automation time. Like, we're not going to do non-automated lines. We're not that captured by the union that we have to give a person a job pushing a button for the rest of their life. You know, so that's good. I also think it was nice that they let you go to the press conference and recognize the fact that you have credentials as a person who talks about this sort of stuff, even if you're not working full time for a major news organization. So I thought that was
and honestly,
good.
like let's be honest, honestly, they probably were aware that I wasn't going to say nice things. Like
Yeah.
I'm sure someone there reads the stuff I write, and I think that's good. That's respectable behavior.
Yeah, so that was those were good, and you know it is just there's it's a big organization. There must be people inside it who are like, oh, rolling their eyes, are out about this proposal or are aware of the fact that it's not great.
I mean, I think Paige, it's when based on what I was seeing in the press conference, it seemed like they were kind of aware that this seemed a bit ridiculous. And the way this smells to me, and I could be wrong because I don't know the politics too well, it feels like this was kind of an order from high above to say, like, you need to show that elevated is just terrible and you need to throw everything at the wall and see what sticks to say that it's the worst thing ever. And that sounds like a political mandate. And that's bad. It's bad. It's bad if it's one of those things where I can imagine, as someone who creates things and people talk to me and yell at me sometimes, like I get that there are probably people who loudly yell that elevated is bad, but especially when the first REM opens, I think a lot of people are going to be quietly very supportive of doing more of that. And people who got on the train of not building stuff are going to probably find the train, they're going to be let off at the next station, so to speak.
Well, I think that having gone to a fair number of protests against the REM, the truth is that a lot of the people that protested it won't be around for that much longer. There's a very old crowd of people, you know. There is a bit of a kind of the generations will come in, and we'll have the Reeces of Montreal who grow up on the West Island taking the REM and think it's cool. They can go downtown and see their friends and then get back out, you know, without it closing and trapping them. Like the
and I think it'll just be, you know, people who like they go to hang out with their friends every weekend and play like hockey on the West Island, and they grow up and maybe they go down to Brossard to see grandma every week, and they wouldn't before because getting down there is kind of a nightmare. And it's just like their experience of the REM is mainly like, oh yeah, like I hear a train go by. It's just how I do so many of the things that are important in my life. It's ridiculous. It just like there will be a cultural shift around it, or like people who come in from the airport, right? And it's like their first experience of Montreal will be getting on the REM to go downtown
instead of a 747.
Pardon me?
Instead of a bus for 747.
Yeah. Like I think it'll be a really positive. Like I don't know. When I look at Toronto and Vancouver, both have good trains to the airport, and when you ask people, they're like, yeah, this is the best way to get to the airport. This is great. Like my first introduction to the city was like getting on this nice clean train that like whisked me downtown. And Montreal will have that.
Yeah, no, it's something I really like about Vancouver. You know, I've often said I like the transit in Vancouver, and I was kind of reflecting on, I'm like, well, in reality, what I like is that when I want to go places in Vancouver, as a person who visits Vancouver, there is a SkyTrain there. It doesn't have massive coverage. It just works for the visitor, and it gives the impression that it's a transit-friendly city. And I mean, think about how often people are internationally kind of sucking off Vancouver being just the best case of evidence. How much of it is that they arrive at the airport and they see this very cool transit system, bam, like as soon as they leave, this automated cart thing, and it's what, like, it was for decades the only one in all of North America, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, like it just sets the pace for your identity as well. How many people will have arrived in Vancouver planning to move there, and they get on the SkyTrain as their first experience in Vancouver? So that when
a lot
10 years later, there's a SkyTrain going in, they think, yeah, it's fucking Vancouver, SkyTrains. Like that's what we build here, you know?
And I mean, and also it's like, it's such a great way to make people think, oh, I might not need a car. Like I was able to get into the city and it was really convenient. And it was like from the airport terminal to my doorstep was really easy. Like, it's like a bus, as much as I'm not I take buses all the time. A bus just doesn't give you that impression of ease and convenience.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. I don't take bus. Like there's got to be some sort of a ratio here, right? But like, I will readily take a metro. Bus, I'll probably try to walk an extra 10, 15 minutes to avoid having to take it, you know, especially in Canada, because it's just so often not the temperature I need it to be comfortable. So, yeah.
I actually think one thing that I did want to say too, that we were talking about yesterday, is that the REM is going to run later than the metro too. So like it's even things like that, right? Like you're downtown and you're having the greatest party ever, and your friends who are living on the metro, they've got to go they've got to go sooner. And it's kind of funny because if the REM East went downtown, then you could conceive of it running until like 1:30, 2 a.m. like the first REM. But if it's like if it ever got built the way they're suggesting it, they'd have to close it whenever they close the metro. Like it
Yeah.
wouldn't make sense to. So it's just there's so many little things that are worse because of this.
Yeah, there's so many bad things that come with like with just with compromising a decision from something that's like technocratically successful, you know, that achieves the kind of like cold goals of a transit system. When you start to compromise it with like emotional things, it just breaks down the decision making process. And you can do, you know, you can do certain amounts to cater for people and have a budget for like integration, you know, like the public art and all that sort of stuff. But you can't go down oh, these guys here, they got more upset and yelled at me more, so I'm scared of them. I think we should give them their thing, you know. And all this
It's
NIMBYism is often just results in things that have these outcomes that are just another generation's fucking, you know, wave of racist stuff. Like Montreal North doesn't get to have a metro because a bunch of people along the line further down who already had a station protested. And yeah, like just to no one's surprise, the people who were protesting, they weren't people of color. It wasn't minorities. It was a bunch of old white people protesting the fucking REM. And it's like, yeah, it's not for you. It's for the people. It's for these less advantaged people than you further out who are going to rely on this to get to fucking work. And right now they sit in traffic for an extra hour a day compared to you because, you know, they can't use transit.
And you know, the funniest thing of all of this is that we can see how I think we can basically see how all of this would have played out with the first REM, which is that it's been built and it runs really close to people's homes. In Griffintown, for example, like it's pretty close to condos and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, yeah, some people are complaining that it's loud, and if it's loud, they can put up a barrier and it'll be quieter. And it's like, yeah, that's all. Like,
Yeah.
and then the REM exists, and it's a thing people get to use for the next 100 years. That's all it really took in terms of actual, like when you came in and said, like, this is what we're going to build. It's going to be elevated. You know, like we have to meet health and safety standards. We can't like jackhammer in your bedroom, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we live in a developed country in a, you know, like, and we have like the standards are only allow you to do certain things. And the first REM, it's just like, let's take it and do what we can do. And if it's a bit loud, like we'll grease the wheels more. We'll put up a little sound barrier where there's a curve, and the price is a bit of complaining and a bit of adjustments need to be made, but you get the project. You actually get all of the benefits versus this like weird treadmill we're on now with the Eastern project, where realistically, do you think there'll be anything in 15, 20 years from now? Like, seems unlikely.
No, I think there'll be a bus, and maybe, I mean, they might go like light rail. Let's talk about light rail. I think that's going to be our final, like a tram. The tram is, I mean, you're the expert, but it seems to me in a similar vein to extending the metro. It's not the right tool for the job to transport people that distance. Would you say that that's probably the biggest problem with a tram that goes all the way from downtown to Pointe-aux-Trembles?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the biggest problem for sure. Like, there's no doubt. It's worth asking, how affordable would a tram be? Like, you know, and like, it's so funny. People, when you don't have to make any compromise, and like the only thing you're thinking about is we must kill this project, you don't think about any possible problem with any other option, right? I was down filming a GO station in Toronto a few weeks ago, and I was probably half a kilometer away from the subway station where there are trams that operate. And, you know, just like with the first REM, when everything's working properly, there's not much noise, it's pretty quiet. But with the trams, when they're going around a corner, you know, like it's steel on steel, it's just like, and so you could hear it from like a half a kilometer away. And it's just so funny because all these people
You're
are
like
saying,
transit.
oh,
You're, by the way, your transit foley is really great. You do a great impersonation of different transit systems.
thank
I
you.
think you should put together a
I,
ringtone kit. Anyway, go
I
on.
appreciate I appreciate that. The thing that's so funny is that like each of the things that people don't like about the REM are conceivable with another. Like, how are you getting power to the trains? There's going to have to be wires above the street. Like, and you know what? Remember when there was a phase of wire NIMBYism at one point? Like
Yep.
there, so it's just like these are all compromises that you just have to make, right? Like you want to put a tram in, it's got to get electricity from somewhere, and it can't from the ground because Montreal gets snow. So you got that problem. It's a bit too slow. Maybe you don't like. It's going to take some. Like that's another thing. It'll take lanes away from cars and buses, and right. So it's going to take up more space on the street. It's just, and it will. There's a lot of potential for it to get into car crashes. And it's
Yeah.
going to be more expensive to operate, so it'll be less frequent. It's just like when you have this attitude of of I don't know, of NIMBYism in general. I don't think that these folks are going to be happy with any solution, right?
Yeah.
Like this is why you can't just kind of bow down and kowtow, because imagine the tram gets proposed and they're like, we don't like the noise, we don't like the people the tram brings, we don't like that it takes up space on the road. I remember in Toronto was putting in some trams, and there were NIMBYs about the power stations for it. They're like, these are going to give off electromagnetic radiation, it's unsafe to live within a block of this. It's just like there's no limit to what it's irrational, right? Like we have to admit that all of this is irrational fundamentally, because if you don't, there's no line where the irrationality stops.
Yeah, there's kind of like you have to have a rule set to make these decisions, because you can't do it. You can't do it on the emotional things because we just can't be trusted. So it's like the noise thing, for example. I remember reading through the contract for REM. They had criteria for decibels, like the volume, and they just, because the thing is, some people seem to be more sensitive to sound than others. Some people are lighter sleepers. Some people keep their windows open at night and always have. Like you can't go based on this kind of individualized how do you feel thing. You just have to establish a rule. We're gonna measure a highway.
Because at the same time, like imagine a hypothetical world page where there's an anti-NIMBY who doesn't hear anything. He's like halfway to being deaf, right? And he can't hear the train. So the train is allowed to be 120 decibels, and you're not allowed to complain about it because I decided that I can't hear it, so it's fine.
Yeah, I think this is where like there is a kind of issue with, when you choose a property, when you choose where to live, like, you've moved around a bunch, and you often choose places that have like transit really close by because you like looking at it and you like using it. It's like useful to film footage and that sort of thing. I live right beside a metro station. And it's kind of a choice that we make, right? The issue, in all of this, is that you're shaking up people's house, and you're making it something which isn't the house that they bought. It's now a house with this other attribute to it, And for lots of people on the block, they're like, great, awesome, now my house has transit nearby. But for a certain number of people, it's not a house that they would buy if they went to buy again. And that's why I really think that, like, I'd like to see, and this is like definitely in the like, sounds crazy, some sort of moving fund, some sort of like recognition of like, we need to get people in the house that suits them.
I don't think that's not even unreasonable at all, Paige. That's a completely reasonable proposal.
When you're weighing it against $36 billion, yeah.
Well, it's reasonable even probably if you're not, like, because the reality is that the property is getting more valuable, whether people like it or not, right?
Yeah.
I think what you're saying highlights something, which is that you cannot do this based on, like you said, you cannot do it based on feelings. This is why you need a government agency that doesn't give you a scattershot, dishonest view of the problem, right? Like they need to have a standard, and they need to say like, this is what you're getting, because you need to be able to say that, hey, like this person's going to complain, and they kind of have to push them over and say like, yeah, unfortunately, you don't get to control the process, right? Like what happens if a new hospital has to go in, right? and like all of the sites are surrounded by people. They're going to have to hear a siren from time to time, right? Do you
Yeah.
just not build the hospital because people don't want to be disrupted at all by sirens, right? Like I've lived near hospitals before. It's really noticeable when you
Yeah.
live near a hospital, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just like one of those things that you cannot submit to the court of public opinion for these critical infrastructure projects. Like it's pretty obvious to me that the pendulum is swinging in the other direction, and like we're gonna put in laws that prevent people from basically NIMBYing projects, right?
Yeah.
Like that's gonna happen.
Yeah. Well, we do. I think we kind of need to. And I mean, I think the kinder version of the law is a built-in sort of, well, two ways. You could do a call your bluff thing with transit. You know, a lot of those NIMBYs, they're protesting. The government, like say an entity like the case could be like, sure, we'll buy your house for the price we know it's going to be worth once we build this project. Here's the offer. And because the NIMBY who just sees transit as obviously negative, you know, because maybe they don't use it, and you know, they kind of go like, sure, yeah, fuck, I'll sell the house, and then the case in 10 years sells the house when the project's finished and make the money off it. They have a real estate arm, you know, so they could just task it like, yeah, and if there's an opportunity, maybe they make more money from it, you know, in the end.
Yeah, I mean they just can't. I think the fundamental problem here is that people need to accept it's one of those things. Like this happens from time to time. People get angry about something that is inherent to it, right? Like it is inherent to the nature of cities that they change, right? Like you cannot live in a city and expect it to stay the same. It's like there are people who want California high-speed rail to get built because they think it's going to be like it's going to like sap the energy of San Francisco out and like transfer it to the middle of nowhere, California. And it's like, well, no, it just doesn't work that way. Cities are about people being close to one another. And it's the same thing. It's like here, cities are changing constantly. And like if they didn't, they would cease to exist because they wouldn't be competitive and they wouldn't, you know, there wouldn't be a reason to live there. And
Yeah.
so you just can't let this be the reason you make decisions. And like politicians who are allowing that to become their legacy, I think are making a huge mistake because, yeah, in 10 years' time, their legacy will be they are the guys who, like in Toronto, there was a previous premier who filled in a subway. And now, anytime you talk about the Eglinton subway, it's like, whoa, remember that old premier who filled it in? It's going to be the same for the Eastern REM with the current politicians. Like, yeah, remember when the case said like 10 billion and you guys got a network for the whole of Eastern Montreal? You guys were the ones that turned that down, right? Like it's not going to be great.
I thought that Project Montreal were into transit. Well, yeah, it's just it wasn't socially acceptable. Wait, so nothing exists now. So nothing was better than something that wasn't socially acceptable. Wait, is it possible that it was socially acceptable? Because it would be if 2 million people have transit, now they have nothing. That's actually the thing that's not socially acceptable. Wait a minute, you know. Like it is, they are going to wear this. I mean, I think going into next election, this is going to be the thing which gets dragged up the most. I'm just like the opposition should catch on this and just toast them, you know.
The social acceptability thing is so close to being like just outright incredibly offensive. Like, what is it? What are you saying, right? Like, can you imagine how social acceptability could be like housing? Like, oh, that's high density housing where young people, immigrants, that's not socially acceptable, right? Like you just see how this could get really bad. Like the justification doesn't make any sense.
It's like who's on transit? Low income people. Who's in higher density housing? Low income people. You know, like it's like condos are cheaper than comparable single family houses in the same market. You know, it's just all this stuff. Like if social acceptability, if you're connecting that to shadows, you're making a horrible mistake. And it's like, I think there's an issue. This is like, you know, a little political for your blood, Reece, but there is an issue with the general progressive movement in that they're like, they have these values, but they are not solving them. And people can tell. Housing prices in Montreal are skyrocketing and transit is not being built. And I have a general sense that on most issues, I am impressed with that kind of group, the group of people that Project Montreal have, in their like concern and ability to address them. They do have like the parks and the design and the thoughtfulness and a lot of stuff. Lots and lots of things are good. But unfortunately, the issue of our times is housing, and transit is a huge part of that and its own issue. You know, transit represents the kind of global warming like side of things, transportation being, I think, the largest source of emissions.
So, at least 25%. Yeah.
Yeah. So on these two issues, which are the defining issues of our times, there's this general like tendency of failure to get the densification done, you know, and failure to build transit. And it's I don't know why it's happening this way. I think it has something to do with if you're a person who's predisposed to being sensitive to individual rights and the individual, you can kind of malfunction in this way where on a case by case basis, you think you're being kind to like make sure that this, you know, grandma doesn't have a shadow in her backyard and, you know, this person here doesn't, you know, isn't disturbed by this thing. But the overall big picture problem it adds up to this failure to address these critical problems. And it really is like, it's got to stop. Or I would assume all these people who can't afford houses and aren't getting the transit will start voting for other people, you know?
Yeah, there's an instability in that, right? Like when you do the thing, like the thing that blows my mind is that Vancouver started building in '86 the SkyTrain, and the network is longer than the Montreal Metro now, and it's like you can just see the effect of that. Vancouver has lots of problems. Housing is a problem for Vancouver, and transportation is more of a problem for Montreal. And it's funny because it's like, well, in the place that was pretty liberal with transportation, Vancouver, people don't really worry about transportation, and people don't complain too much about the SkyTrain. And in the place that was more liberal with housing, people have affordable places in Montreal for the most part, much more than Vancouver, and people don't complain about it too much, right? Like the Vancouver NIMBYs would say, like maybe that's the answer here is to show people the absurdity of it, is to say like, how would people in Vancouver feel if you upzone the whole city to allow triplexes, right? Like in Montreal,
they would lose their minds.
What absurd things would they say, right? It's the same thing. It's like it's this blowing out of proportion, this thing which has some very localized negative effects that people will learn to deal with. Like, yeah, if you slept with your window open, you close your window. I like sleeping with my window open sometimes. Sometimes I close it. You know, if there's fireworks going off like last night because 4th of July, then you know what? I close my window. It's one of those things. It's such a weird, we cannot build transportation infrastructure for the city because I sleep with my window open. Yeah. And it's just, I
think people watching should know this is a real person that we're talking about who frequently complains about, I think it's a REM, right? Because they sleep with their window open. You're like, oh, I mean, what are you going to do? If you slept with your window open and you're on a road and the road was widened, you know, you would have a problem, you know? There's actually a really cool, no, I won't get into that because it's too long a thing. Okay, so any other, I feel like we've really gone through everything tonight. There are so many comments that I don't think we can get through the questions.
The only other thing I would say is just we need to tell people where they should go from here, because I don't want to be one of those people who just says, yeah, the REM is bad and we can't have that. Like sort of like I don't have. People need to present a vision for the future. If you don't like the REM, the original REM, you need to say what you're going to build that's practical instead of the REM to provide people transit, right? So what do people do if they're not happy with the current outcome that the government has provided them with?
Yeah. I think it's really hard because honestly, I am at a bit of a loss with this stuff. I feel like, I mean, we were talking about before we came on the call, like you and I have devoted so much energy to this stuff. Like I actually started off my notes up here with a clarification that we're not paid or anything, you know, because we spend so much time talking about liking the system, you know, like I've never been paid or anything by anyone involved in what we're talking about. I don't think you have at all with any of these agencies, right, Reece? It's just like we just care about it, and you know, Reece doesn't even fucking live here. You know, yeah. Reece just cares about Canada being successful. You know, which at this point in time, Montreal is in. So it's hard to direct people.
Some dude comments on my Twitter that, oh, you're being paid. It's like, no, why? What would the point be? Like there are people being paid to write this report to say that elevated transit was bad, and it didn't convince many people.
Yeah, it's just like we're just pointing out the obvious problems with this proposal and how it's gone. And it is like, it's tempting to say, like, hand it back to the case. I would obviously prefer that just because it's the better of two options. But if the ARTM had come up and said, like, look, we did the thing you asked, but at the same time, we took the original REM to less proposal and we've made some modifications to it.
Sorry, I did not hear what you said.
Sorry, I think I was talking kind of quickly. Am I coming through, Reece? No, I'm cutting out. Okay.
You almost what the something's happening.
Something's happening. Well, it might be the microphone dying. Let's have a look. Oh,
What?
it is dying, and it's going to make a lot of noise if I plug it in. Oi. You can hear me though, right? Right now?
I can.
Okay. Yeah, it looks like the headset it's going to die pretty soon, so it's probably a good time to wrap this up anyway. Okay. Now I don't know if it's you or me, but the battery is low, but it seems to think it's still coming through.
Yeah, no, it was just I think my internet connection isn't great, so I didn't hear what you said. But you were saying like obviously, if the ARTM came up with a legitimately better proposal, for sure we'd be like, that's a better proposal, and we'd criticize the case and their whole approach to they were arrogant about the downtown thing, and they also shouldn't have proposed it before the first one was open, even if they made the financials worse or whatever, because in their case, you weren't going to get anything done versus getting something done, right? Like maybe a slightly less valuable project. So like we criticize the case, but the reality is here, I think on balance, that they have made the less egregious decisions.
Yeah, I mean that's basically what we're asking politicians to do: choose the best of these options. Like they're all going to have downsides. Choose the one that has the least downsides. The cases option had that. I mean, I guess we do come from a kind of more nerdy technical sort of position on this sort of stuff, but like I mean I try to make a point to people. I live on the proposed route and I liked it. Like I was personally connected to this in a way that could relate to the people who had an issue with it as was possible, and supported it. So it's like I know for a fact that it's not the craziest. It's not. It was viable enough for me and the people that I know who live near me. Anyway, we should wrap this up, seeing as the audio might be cutting out. Reece, it was good talking to you. And yeah, I guess the call to action on this would be writing letters to the paper and letting politicians know that there's lots of people out there who wish that the REM de l'Est, which would have started construction back in January, was underway. We're getting nothing, and there is something that could exist. I always imagine that when I'm walking around, like what would have been happening right now if it hadn't been torpedoed.
And hey, I guess ultimately support the first REM too. Be out there when it opens, and if you're thinking about moving or something, consider living on it, because it's just one of those things where it's like vote with your feet, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like hopefully it all goes well, and like support it if it's good and let people know. If the narrative can be changed on the REM, the first phase of a REM, as soon as possible, like the sooner that people go, oh, it's good, which they will at some point, if we can shift that from being 15 years out, like a generation of kids growing up used to it, to 5 years out, then it's the sort of thing where the original case REM de l'Est proposal could be picked up and run with. The more years that pass, the more it's like I would need to redo the whole thing from scratch, right? So 2025 is the next municipal election, and yeah, the mayor doesn't like kind of do a pivot on this, and the politicians keep going 2 thumbs up for this thing that will never happen, then like that would be, I guess, the next window for someone to come in with some fresh ideas, and a mayor could run on, not catering to the NIMBYs. Anyway, it's pretty bleak though. I gotta say, I think this mayor so far has been very popular. For good reason. She's good at lots of things, and she is very she's a good figurehead for the city. A lot of what mayors do is just be positive and make you feel proud to be a member of a city. She does that in great abundance, but you know, these things, this I think will really scar her legacy, and I think it's just, you know, how much longer is it going to go on? Definitely feels like the honeymoon's over, though, at least from what I'm seeing online. Yeah. Okay, cool. Let's stop streaming.
See you
All right.
later, Paige.
Bye, Reece.